Hello, everyone. How's it going? This is Ron Sparkman, and I am one half of the Mars guys, and we want to welcome you to the Space, Science, and Sci-Fi Summit, where we're bringing space a little closer to home. And today we're speaking with Jeff Simons, sci-fi author, science advocate, and director of operations at Startalk. And Jeff, there's just so much to talk about with you. You've kind of dove into a little bit of everything, comics and sci-fi, and now space and science communication. So let's start off a little bit with your background. Can you share a bit of your personal journey as an author and as a science communicator?
Sure. So I actually went to Georgetown University and fully intended to go to law school. And in my senior year summer, I tore the ligaments in my right knee. And that kind of delayed everything. And I spent a lot of time. It was pre-arthroscopy. And I ended up deciding that what I wanted to do was be a writer and not go to law school. So I told my dad that, and he was real supportive. He's always been a never get stuck in a job that you don't love kind of guy. And so I ended up doing things like driving a cab for a year, working in a bakery, doing all sorts of drag jobs. And then a friend of mine from college, his dad, who was in advertising, said, "You're a good writer." He'd seen my short stories, and he said, "You should get a job in advertising." So I tried, and I didn't really fit their kind of training modes or whatever. And I ended up at a direct response company that sold wooden ship models, radio control cars, and car collectibles. And so my real first job in advertising was about hobbies and about fun and about entertainment. And when you're selling that kind of stuff, it really changes what you're doing. I wasn't shoving stuff down people's throats. I was actually giving them stuff that they wanted. And that affected my whole view on advertising. So, in my career, I've had a lot of clients, and I've sold a lot of credit cards and insurance, and you name it. Okay, but for me, the projects were always things that I loved. And so at one point, I was leaving the agency I was at, and I had the opportunity. I saw an ad in the Wall Street Journal, I think, or the New York Times, for Marvel Entertainment. They said, "We're looking for a super writer to write about our superheroes." And it was on a Friday. And so I wrote up this whole article from the point of view of like being a games master, right? And how I could, I treated their content kind of that way, right? And it was real, like, very much fan oriented. And by the way, you have to understand, I was not a comics fan at the time. But the idea of helping sell comics, and those stories was interesting to me. So I ended up getting my resume. I found out where their P.O. box was, and I went there Friday, so that it was literally in the post office Monday morning. So the first thing on this Jim Brennan's desk at Marvel was my letter and my resume and everything. And he called me and said, "Look, I got a pile of stuff, but you're the first one, so come down." And he and I had a meeting of the minds. He loved what I did, gave me a tryout assignment, and he never interviewed anybody else. So I made his job easier. And at that point, I was like the fourth person in promotions at Marvel. And by the time I left promotions, we'd grown the department to maybe 50 people. And we spun off a corporate marketing department, and I became the creative director for corporate marketing at Marvel. One of the things I'm most proudest of in my career, is that I realized that if I was going to be evangelizing Marvel to fans, to readers, to become a geek. And so I basically sucked up, all of Marvel history and read a ton of stuff, and actually, was called at various times by Dana Morshed and Jim Kruger, who I ended up hiring and bringing into Marvel, an honorary geek. I didn't have all of the grasp that they did, and I certainly didn't have the history, but I had the appreciation. And that was my job at Marvel, was to basically go out and sell people like Kellogg's and Nabisco and McDonald's and Kmart and, everybody on doing promotions with our characters, and then crafting the promotion so that we didn't take advantage of the kids. We, for the first time, started using real comic book creators. So when there's the back of a Cookie Crisp box, okay, and we have a find the characters thing, it was done by the Kuberts, okay? And so we brought real and Dana Morshed was great at finding those people. So we always made sure that we gave the people who were buying it because they were Marvel fans real Marvel content, okay, done by real Marvel creators. And that appreciation of putting yourself in the fan's shoes as opposed to the seller's shoes as opposed to, you know, being Marvel and everything, and thinking about, well, how does a kid respond? That was something that taught me a lot and really primed me for what I became when I started moving into social media down the road. Anyway, after Marvel, I ended up with my own agency. I moved to San Diego to write a science fiction book, which was, in fact, became Spirit in Real Time. I was in San Diego for a while, and then I came back to New York because Bill Jemas, who would eventually become the head of Marvel, had wanted to start a game company, and he invited me in. It was called Black Box Games, and so I moved to New York to become part of Black Box Games from San Diego. And then Black Box Games never really got started, so I started my own game company, QED Games, with my good friend and business partner, Evan Jones, who was the game designer. And we did some games. We did the Blue versus Gray, the Civil War card game, which they were using in West Point for a while in a class to teach, and has never been broken, which for a historical simulation where people are constantly looking to break it, it has never been broken. It also delivered real Civil War photographs, a lot of history on all the cards. Very proud of that. And eventually, Bill Jemas became president of Marvel, and he came to us and said, hey, you want to do a role-playing game? And so we came up with a role-playing game, and Evan Jones and a guy named Dan Gelber, who'd been one of the designers of Paranoia, one of the premier games masters in New York City. And we started doing this game, and we went back to Bill, and we had all the people at Marvel, you know, they sat down, and we played them through a scenario, and Bill was kind of like, it's kind of like every other game. And he sent us back to the drawing board a little bit. And that's when we came up with the idea of losing the dice entirely. And because in comic books, you know, superheroes don't die, and the superheroes don't have a bad roll, right? It's not like Spider-Man's fighting against the Green Goblin, and he rolls bad, and he's dead. Okay, that doesn't happen. And so we had to say, well, what is the relationship? And we came up with this idea of it's really how bad the character wants it and how much effort they're willing to put into it. So we came up with this idea of stones of energy, okay, that you'd have a pool of what your character was capable of, and then you could even tap into your own physicality to get more stones when it really mattered, kind of like all in playing poker, right? And so we came up with this diceless role-playing game. It was critically acclaimed. The first one was a general book. The second one was the X-Men. And then the third book that we did was the Hulk and the Avengers that you were talking about. And that's the book that we did. We had a lot of good help. Jim Kruger wrote a lot of the copy for the books. And, you know, he's a top talent, comic book talent, and has an encyclopedic knowledge of all things Marvel and DC.
Amazing.
And so we came up with this game, and eventually Marvel pulled the plug because it wasn't pushing as much paper as the regular comic books. It didn't have the right profit margins. You know, a business decision. We totally understood that. What we love about it is that there's still a user group online and a website, and they have taken our game and our system, which we wanted them to do. Our goal was to teach you how to become a storytelling, role-playing, you know, a storytelling games master with characters who were co-participants in telling that story. And so that's still there, and they've expanded the universe to the Wild West and to other science fiction properties and to DC, you name it. And so every once in a while I'll go take a look at it because people are still playing the system, and it's a great system, and we're very proud of it. So anyway, that's both the Hulk connection and a second, you know, a second life at Marvel, you know, through QED Games. And anyway, so I had this game company for a while, and then got married, went back to work in mainstream advertising for about a decade or whatever, and then left the agency and started out on my own doing a lot of social media work. And at that point, a friend of mine from another project, Laura Berland, came to me and said, you know, I'm just getting in bed with Startalk, and we have a desire to increase our digital footprint, to build our social media channels, to therefore increase viewership or listenership of the podcast. At the time, it was just the Startalk radio show. And so I got started back in 2012, March of 2012. And, you know, have proceeded to work, you know, together with Neil and Helen. Helen Matzos, our other executive producer. Neil and Helen are principals in the company, and Laura is my boss. She's the CMO, and we've been building the audience ever since through social media, and I've gotten more and more involved. And at this point, I've moved from being social media director at at Startalk to being the director of operations for the entire Startalk podcast network, which now is 3 shows. And who knows, maybe there'll be more in the future, spinoffs. And that's really how I got where I am now, I think, more than anything else.
That's great. And man, you've really kind of been all over, and especially to go from so many things, just, sci-fi writer, game writer, and, working that heavily with Marvel, and now Startalk, it's kind of touching in different areas and then kind of changing those areas a little bit to what we know now. That's a pretty amazing story so far. And so sci-fi, obviously a very big thing for you. So what were some of your sci-fi influences growing up?
So, you have these memories of being a kid that are, maybe you remember them, but maybe you're told them also, and that becomes your memory.
Mm-hmm.
My mom was a big Star Trek fan. She was a big Mr. Spock fan, as many women were when the original series was on.
Same. Yep, my mom was too.
and so I would watch it with her. And so I think that for me, the earliest science fiction that I can think of is Star Trek, and I have been a Star Trek fan ever since, through all the shows. I'm debating the whole, CBS All Access thing now. I feel a little bit kind of corralled, but I will probably pay because it's Star Trek, right? And then I started reading science fiction. John Christopher's series, The White Mountains and City of Golden Lead, and there's a 3rd book in there, which is about alien invasion, was the first science fiction I can remember. But then I remember being in maybe 5th grade or 6th grade and being in the school library and looking for books to read, and I discovered Isaac Asimov. And that
Absolutely.
was it. Asimov was my first love in science fiction. Eventually I then branched out to Heinlein, Poul Anderson's future history stuff, which I loved. I mean, read all that stuff and was a huge science fiction and fantasy fan for a long time. And then William Gibson and cyberpunk came along. And for me, that was the first time that the science fiction was mine. A lot of that science fiction had been written long before I was born, okay, or when I was a kid, and decades before my current frame of reference. But once cyberpunk hit, that was right where I was, right? That was stuff that I could relate to, that was happening and unfolding, that was my near future. And so to me, cyberpunk is really where if I had to pick anything right now, I'd pick cyberpunk. And in fact, William Gibson's Burning Chrome is something that whenever I travel and I need to grab something to know I'll have something to read, I bring that. And I've gone through 3 or 4 dog-eared copies. I lend them out. I'm actually, I don't remember who I gave my last copy to, but I have to buy the next one before I have to travel again. But Burning Chrome is poetry to me. It's so brilliantly done. And all of Gibson's stuff now, I actually, Neil Stephenson, I like him a lot, and he does some great stuff. Currently, Cory Doctorow is one of the only cyberpunk science fiction writers, and I'm eating up his Homeland stuff and everything else. Cory Doctorow is great. So yeah, science fiction has been pretty much a lifelong passion of mine, and then eventually I wrote something.
I love it. And so science fiction, we kind of got a little bit of your influences there, but science is obviously, a major part of your life right now. So who were maybe your major science influences growing up? Or if there was an event that maybe kind of guided you to, a love of, space, science, that kind of thing?
I have, again, one of these memories, and I actually have it, of sitting on the couch with my mom and watching a Mercury flight. And by definition, it was probably Gordon Cooper. But for me, as long as I can remember, that idea of, at one point as a kid, I was going to be an astronaut. Now, my daughter, who is turned 13 today, has every intention of being a Mars-bound astronaut. What she wants to do on that has changed from some engineering to some medical stuff. She's now reading, neuroscience textbooks, believe it or not, and everything. So, but she wants to go out there, and maybe she'll be the one who gets, to go. Science influences, it's funny. The one that springs out to me is a junior high school teacher named Mr. Widmer, who was everybody's most hated science teacher. But he was a tough teacher. He had no room for human emotion or compassion. He was just one of those teachers that almost everybody hates. But there was something about how he delivered science, I think. So I wouldn't sit down and say he's the guy, except when you ask that question, he's the name that pops in, and so I think he deserves credit. I had become a fan of Neil's, and obviously, Omni magazine was big, right? Some of the science fiction magazines or places that you'd go for science fiction had science. The funny thing is, my friends who were real science heads in school look at me and think, how did I get so lucky to work with Neil deGrasse Tyson when I was the Englishman guy and they were the science people, right?
Yeah.
But because science fiction has always been so important to me, and in science fiction, obviously science matters, it's always just been part of the fabric, right? If you're a smart, rational person, then science needs to be part of your understanding of the world. And I don't know how to separate it, right? One thing
I wish more. I wish more did.
Talk about, evidence-based conclusions and everything. And I have gone through periods of time from when I was younger, believing in God, to a period of time when my own science fiction writing and games mastering had me create kind of Lucas Force Eastern mishmash of things that to me were people shared belief gave rise to these ideas. Neil Stevenson in Snow Crash talks about people being hardwired for a slot in their brains for religion and something bigger. And then I read Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion. And when it came out, it reminded me that I was an atheist. I kind of gotten caught up in my own fiction, right? And some of this other stuff. And then I read The God Delusion. I was like, no, wait a second. This is how I see the world. And I had fallen off the wagon, as it were. And ever since reading The God Delusion, there's been no question in my mind that, man makes religion, and we're groping to try and understand what's out there. And primitive people who didn't have science, their answer was something like God. Okay? But now we
can't explain it.
Right. Yep. We have science. And people are all like, well, you can't say what happened before the Big Bang, right? And so aren't, in the end, you're saying there's some creative God, and I'm saying if science finds the evidence for that, then we'll all believe in it, right? But what we're saying is this is what we know. This is what we can prove. This is what we know. And until we have that evidence that can prove something else, we're going to believe this, right? So that's, for me, science is just infused with everything. But I discovered Neil actually through Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert. That was the first time.
Love those guys.
Him, right? And so when Laura called me and said, hey, you want to work on Startalk? I was like, wait, isn't that Neil deGrasse Tyson's thing? And I knew him from that. And so many other people, he became that voice of like kind of every man's access to science, because he's so good at explaining these things. He
really is.
Brian Greene's been on our show, and he's great at explaining stuff. Okay, but for me, the first person who broke through those walls of, you want to zone out and say, I just don't get it, I just don't understand it. Neil was the, and so getting to work for him, or with him, has been amazing.
And that sounds like an incredible experience. And, speaking a bit about Dawkins, he was, throughout the majority of my life, I was a believer until I watched Cosmos. And at the beginning of the first episode of Cosmos, I thought aliens were ridiculous, and I totally believed in God. And by the end of that first episode, it was vice versa. And I was questioning a lot of things and had to deal with a lot of the guilt. And Richard Dawkins was one of those that, kind of put me that way as, here's a great way of understanding, and here's a science-based way of understanding the world. And the other one was Sam Harris. But a few months ago, I got to see Richard Dawkins. I got to see him speak live, got to meet him, and he's as amazing as he always is. I got to ask him a question about kind of life in the universe and what he thought was going to be out there. So that was pretty fun to be able to kind of pick his brain a little bit about what we're going to see. And I love that there's that interconnection between science and the idea of God. Is very fun. It's something that's kind of interesting to go out there. But once we have science and we have something that I know and understand this, that it almost allows you to see the world almost like Neo when he sees the Matrix for the first time. You get to put it all together. when you look at the mountains, as say in Cosmos, when you look across, through the fields of Dover, like everything that you see, the cliffs of Dover, you see, all the way in the past, all the way in the future. And I love that explanation of just where even something that we think is simple rock isn't. It's something more, and it's the history and it's the past coming back to kind of see us a little bit. And I love that. I think that's why we all love science so much, and one of the reasons that sci-fi also connects so many of us. And speaking of sci-fi, let's dive right in and talk about your book, Spirit in Real Time. Can you give us a bit of a spoiler-free synopsis and let us know what your book is about? If you can. We'll try our best not to spoilers, just in case.
No. We can avoid any spoilers. The hero of the story is, and it's actually a series. The second book is halfway written. The third book is fully plotted and outlined. And the main character, the hero, is a girl named Maxine Redford, Max to her friends, and she is a gamer. She's a girl in a world of male trolls, and very good at what she does. She's in high school, and she has a group of friends, and we get to see the world that she lives in, which is in 2020, so it's just a little down the road. One day her dad doesn't come home. He's a computer science professor at UCSD, and he doesn't come home. And she tries to figure out what happened. And through the help of her and some of her friends, one of whom is a hacker, another is this character named Melissa. Her avatar name is Melissa Mystery. And one of the things she does is she helps kids who've been adopted find their birth parents, whether they want to be found or not. Hacking, through public records, through all sorts of things. She provides that service for kids. And so that's Melissa. Another character, her friend is Flack, a boy who's a hacker and a programmer. And together with them and the help of some of their other friends, they discover what's going on with their dad, and they set out to resolve the problem. And it brings them into conflict with international spies and hackers and the government and the police and all sorts of other things. And we get to see this adventure that they go on. And I'm not going to say how it works out, but I will say that the way the story ends is the starting point for the next story. Important things happen, and there are big changes. And we don't know exactly what they mean in the beginning. We'll find that out over the next two books as well. I don't know if that's a great job of synopsizing, but
I think no. I mean, it gives people a general feel of it, and very rarely do I like to compare something to something else. But I mean, really, one of the big compliments I can give it, because it's just so big now, and so many people hear it, is Ready Player One. And if you enjoy that, this is something that is still in that kind of area. There's not a whole lot like Ready Player One, and so to read something that has nothing to do with it whatsoever, when I started reading, I was like, man, it was the follow-up. It's what I followed Ready Player One up with completely by accident. I happened to find out about the book because of somebody with the Startalk Patreon. He had asked you to give him an autograph. I was like, I didn't know Jeff wrote. And reading it, it was really kind of perfect how that came out. And something that you do that I love is that you created a really powerful and, most importantly, relatable character in Max. It's something that you connect with her really quickly, and especially that part of she in that world and creating an avatar, she tries to hide herself a little bit. And I think any nerd understands that we try to hide behind it. I know I did as a DJ. I had to create this big, personality, and when really behind it all, I just want to sit at home and play video games and nerd out. But that the world didn't look at us like that in the 90s. That's not what everybody was into. It wasn't those comics. So you did a great job with creating Max and kind of dealing with her feelings and emotions. So what made you decide to take this story and create it and kind of drive it through a female's eyes, a woman's eyes?
I'll answer that in a second. I just want to go back to one thing. I haven't read Ready Player One, and in fact, I have to be very careful when I'm reading, because I'm self-published and because the book isn't widespread yet. I don't want people to think that I read other people's books and ripped them off. And so when people said, "Oh, you should do this because it's a lot like that," I've avoided that. Charles Stross has had some really good books that tread the line in the role-playing versus reality realm, as have Dr. others. And so I have to be very careful with that, only because because I want to be able to say, no, I never read that, as opposed to somehow my brain read it, subsumed it, sliced and diced it, and it came back and it was somebody else's ideas. Even though there's a lot of that in science fiction, and you can see homages, trends, ideas, or whatever, I try not to do that. But getting back to Max, this is going to sound like a cop-out, but it's not. It's always been her story, right? That it emerged into my brain as Max's story, not somebody else's. And I have a short story that was I wrote a long time ago that had, and they're not published or anything, but it had a very smart female character who manipulates all of the people around her to get out of her small hick town. And she manipulates it in a pretty violent and psychologically calculating but devastating way to the people around her. And I've always been interested in that idea that, you can have a fair form but a foul heart. I know I'm butchering Shakespeare on that. And that idea that people want to dismiss women or they want to objectify women, but they rarely give women, and by extension kids, the credit for what's actually going on in their lives and their brains. And so that creates a disconnect between the seems versus is that you can play with, right? And so, in Max's case, you rightfully point out that her avatar within the gaming community, Spirit, is male. And she did that because she was playing a game where there were notoriously misogynistic players. And a lot of the women, the girl gamers who were playing, decided rather than deal with that at all, they just created male avatars. And the problem with Max is that avatar then comes to the attention of an invitation-only high-end gaming group, okay, where the best of the best go to play. And so she accepts that invitation, and now she has to stay male, or she's been lying about who she is, and that's something that can get her kicked out of that gaming group, right? But in her personal avatar, she actually creates an avatar that's very much how she looks in real life, with a little of the, she's a little bit more perfect than she might look, but she's very much who she is in real life. And we talk about the avatars that are different. And that's something that's going to come back throughout the whole series, but also is in the book, right, is seems versus is. How you appear versus who you are. What kind of personas you have to put on. Flack makes a comment that he gets away with murder because kids think of him as a surfer dude, right? A blonde-haired, rollerblading young guy and a kid, and that he's got to be lightweight. And so that disarms his enemies. They never really understand what he's capable of. And I've always liked that. It goes back to Marvel and the fans, right? Marvel had a tendency to think of kids as dollar signs and eyeballs, not as the kid. But the kid is the hero of their own stories, and they're interacting with our heroes, right? And so it's the same thing here, where the title of the sequel is The People Who Don't Count, right? It's very easy.
I like that.
As society moves forward and as technology moves forward and becomes more pervasive in our lives, that individuals get lost in the shuffle, right? Look at the Equifax hack right now. Half of America maybe has had their personal data hacked, and the company that did it doesn't give a damn because we're not their customers. Their customers are the people buying our information. And so that is one of the dangers of how technology can move, right? The whole Facebook Russia thing right now. Without getting political on it, I don't care what side of the issue you're on, I don't think any of us want to find out that things that sources we thought we could trust are in fact propaganda arms, right? And so that's a real problem. And that comes through here as well. And that's kind of where, where I'm going with that. But anyway, getting back to girls, just for a second, we live in a great time where ceilings are being broken. There are still problems, and I'm not Pollyanna-ing this at all, right? But look at Startalk All-Stars. We just actually, I just found out that we're adding Heather Berlin. This is the first announcement of that Heather Berlin, a noted neuroscientist who's been our guest on a number of shows, okay, is going to be Startalk All-Star.
Awesome.
Hosts. And so we now are over 50% of the All-Stars hosts are women. science educators who are working in their field. And it runs the gamut from people like Carolyn Porco, who've been fighting that battle forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Worked on Voyager, that was her first thing with Carl, right? That's where she started working on the Voyager project, right? And so she's been fighting that for a long time, to people like Natalia Reagan, okay, who's, really getting started. She's a primatologist, okay, and she's new. Or Emily Rice, Summer Ash, a lot of these people are, at the beginnings of careers, right? And so we cross the gamut. We cover different subjects. So there are plenty of female role models, and that idea of, if I can see it, I can be it, is something that you want to just show. So for me with Max, not that this is where that came from, but it became important to me to be able to show people, and eventually my daughter, who loves the book, right, that you don't have to be the limitations that your teachers, your parents, society want to put on you. And that the only thing stopping you is you, because those obstacles can be breached, right? It's like when people look at Neil, okay? Obstacles can be breached when you say, I'm not going to let them stop me. And all of our science educators, are people, the women especially, are people who didn't let that stop them and became who they wanted to be and are following their passion and bring others along for the ride. And so to me, Max is a little like that.
And I think that's one of the reasons too, is that having that connection, I get that, to be in my early 30s and to find something that puts me on an entirely different path and be terrified of it. What is a DJ going to be able to do in the science community in any way, shape, or form, and how welcoming it's been, and just trying to hit every single one of those steps of, trying to move forward and to be something, and then just to see what is possible if you just really just go out and do it. And I think that was actually something that kind of helped me with science, was instead of saying, I want to believe in something and this is going to be the thing that pushes me, I just have to know that anybody can do anything. If I put in the work, I can knock it out and do it. And it's sort of something that we see in these kind of characters. Neil broke boundaries, and the women that are part of that are breaking boundaries. To be your mind is your mind. We all have that ability to get out there and connect with people. And what can we do to do that? And I love the fact that you kind of equate that to the character that you work with. And so Max actually has a lot that she has to deal with in this. And you kind of mentioned a minute ago, how do you write a female character that has to live in this male-driven world of gaming, and that world is changing? How did you come to that? What kind of research did you do to see, how are they being treated? What's going on? How did you kind of find that all out?
Well, there are a couple of things. First of all, I couldn't be an actor, but one of the things I liked about advertising is that each new client was something that you had to learn the jargon for their industry, their category, or whatever. So I've been writing and assuming other people's voices for a while. And when I was at Marvel, or actually after Marvel as a freelancer, I got to work on a Marvel Universe card game, and I got to write 3 game guides from the points of view of characters, and one of them was Jubilee. When you're writing comics and stuff, and you have to put on that person's speech patterns. So another one was Wolverine. And so to write in their voices helps a lot, right? Finding that voice of the person helps. But I think, I think a writer who, and I don't want to sound egotistical or whatever, but any writer who keeps their eyes open to the stories that are around them. And there was a period of my life for a year where I drove a cab, and I was writing short stories, and I was listening to the stories, and I was asking my passengers and listening and being open to that, right? And so we're a conduit. From, Faulkner, it turns out a lot of his characters were actually people he knew, right? They were people who lived in Yaknapatawpah County, okay, or the equivalents thereof, and he didn't create them, he just described them, right? And so writers can be conduits, and I think that my job has just been listen to the characters and what they want to do and the things they want to say and how they want to say it and get out of their way, right? And that's something writers have to step up to the plate with, I think. I use the term about willful writers. When you're reading a story and something happens that doesn't feel right for the character, usually that's because the writer wanted to do that, but it wasn't necessarily where the character was going in their story arc. To me, it's about listening to those characters and having them be alive and kind of fight for what they want in your own brain, and that comes out on the paper. The gut check for me was that a large number of my friends are women, and so most of the people who read the manuscripts were women. And so they, it turns out I didn't get a whole lot wrong in those perspectives, and they loved it. And in fact, for the most part, everybody that I know who's read the story has thought that the characters were realistic and really bonded with them. So I must have done something right. But I didn't go out to research anything specifically. They were just kind of in my head talking. And at each given point, it's kind of like games mastering a little bit, right? I love games mastering because I got to be all the NPCs in the world, right? As opposed to when you're playing
yeah, you did.
or role-playing games, you're one character, you're you. Well, I got to be everybody. But my everybody were realistic. When I was an NPC, that was a living, breathing character with its own goals, its own desires, and its own actions that people may not have liked, right? And they didn't even necessarily fit my worldview. They fit that character at the moment that I was role-playing. It's the same thing with these characters. In the story, there's a moment in time when Melissa makes a choice that kind of is a little unexpected, but was right for Melissa. I was surprised when she made that choice. When I'm writing it, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, she's not going to do this thing. And it was like, wow. But that's one of the paybacks to a writer. When you're actually making your characters so real that they're kind of interacting with you, then you get to be thrilled when they make their choices or upset when they make their choices, kind of like the way the readers will be. So I think that's what I tried to do, and hopefully I got it right.
And I love that. And this that kind of leads into something else that I really noticed with what you did. There's a lot of those human elements that so many people can connect to. We've all, so many of us have been the product of a broken home, or we've had people that we really cared about that have gotten into really bad situations with dangerous people, and we don't know how to deal with it, especially this day and age with so much going on with the kind of the opioid crisis that we have in the country. And, what do we do? Who do we trust when something really important happens? Because the people that you think you're going to be able to trust might not be the people you should lean on. And I really love that. And you say the characters are kind of driving the story, but were the story elements like that something that you meant to get to, or were those storytelling themes sort of something that developed on their own as those characters made those decisions and just became more alive in kind of your mind?
So sort of a three-step answer here. I'm going to start with a quote that Stan Lee said. Stan Lee said, DC made up all these fake places, Metropolis and Gotham and everything else. He said, but for me, we put it in Manhattan because we could look out the window and we could see what was going on. We knew the place. Well, what's the big difference is that, from my point of view, Marvel is grounded in the real world and DC happens in fictional places, right? Even if Gotham is kind of New York or kind of whatever, right? Where is Gotham actually? Right? Which city is Metropolis? But in Marvel, it's New York. And Stan was trying to be an efficient creator. If you don't have to waste time with that, then you can spend time creating, Wonder Mountain or the places that don't exist, right? The blue going on the moon. And so for me, writing what right? That's kind of what that is, was part of it. And I just kind of looked at what was going on and turn to that for inspiration and also for content, right? And so if you're not making cardboard characters and you're thinking, well, what is going on? What made each of those characters the way they are and how would they interact with these things? And then you map onto it reality, that makes it easier. And the other thing is that one of the campaigns that I created and ran as a games master was a campaign called Doorman, which was science fiction, and it took place here because it meant that I could always games master, an impromptu thing for my players just by going to what I knew and placing it there. It made much more enjoyable interactions, and I didn't have to go, oh, well, wait 4 weeks while I develop a new place that we're going to play, right? And because I'm a storyteller, it also meant that I could come up with ideas like what's going on below Manhattan, or, secret places that people don't know about, just because I'm like, well, what if that was that? Or what if that was that? And so for me, it's all very spur of the moment, and it's suffused with what's going on. And that's why I like cyberpunk, because cyberpunk was was what's just ahead, right? And you could see how you get there, but what can you do what can you expose that we might not be thinking of, right? That yes, makes sense to be there, okay, but we haven't quite gotten there yet. And so it's the same thing with this. So when you talk about kids from broken homes, or you talk about kids dealing with, language issues, or parents who don't understand what they're doing, or they want to be an artist but they're a programmer, all of those things, that just comes out of how people are living their lives. And in fact, in the next book, there's even more of that. We meet all sorts of new characters in the sequel that come from even less known places to us, that come with their own problem, right? There's a pair of characters that live in ghettos in South Africa that are dealing with the issues there, right? And so, the idea of finding out what those are and how they work, but then making the people be human within those, okay, just from, I think, being a student of humanity, right? And knowing that nobody is this picture perfect, character. Even our town, Thornton Wilder, right? You think everybody's a certain way, but their realities are very different, right? That's always been baked into good literature for me. And the better sci-fi, right, had characters that were like that. And so, I think that's where it comes from. It just comes out of me seeing where the world is and how people are living.
And I think that's something that's so important, that in developing characters that we show people, real people, is that we sometimes take these people of power and wealth and heap onto them that they're perfect or they're this or they're that, when everybody's got issues. It's just celebrities go through divorce, and they have drug problems and alcohol problems, and it's all these things that they're human. They've just got a little bit more money than we do, and honestly, in the end, that's never really all that important. And I love to see the connections to what so many people have went through, and that's why I think that so many people will connect to this book. If people listening to this haven't read the book, I think that just listening to what you're talking about and how much passion you have for it and what you put into it is certainly going to catch their interest. And one of the things that I love about it, and we don't want to touch too much on politics, so this one will be kind of a quick in and out thing, but you do have Orwellian elements in there that that the people coming for them are able to find out things they shouldn't necessarily know. And that is something we've seen more and more in our world, and especially, and this came out even before the recent election and everything that's been going on. So when you are in the process of creating this, did you kind of have a little moment of seeing the future a little bit, or is it just an eerie coincidence that some of the things you talk about have sort of come to fruition in some ways?
Systems and organizations seem to, when they're not in a downturn, okay, seem to try and expand their power and their control over their constituents, however that you define that, right? Customers, citizens, employees. So as technology becomes more pervasive and therefore more integrated, and some can say more intrusive into the fabric of our lives, the organizations or the people who have the control over those also have increased control into people's lives, right? And something that I got from Cory Doctorow more than anywhere else, which is that the difference between people who understand programming, really understand programming, you can call them hackers, you can call them programmers, whatever, but this is what they do. They don't look at the internet and see mystery. They don't go, oh, I didn't realize that those were sponsored ads that were driven by an algorithm, or demographic targeting or whatever. They know that, right? And they also know how to protect themselves and how to get inside and outside of it. But even they often can fail at that, right? Even a guy like Edward Snowden, who Neil interviewed and certainly changed my mind about who Snowden is for me, went from traitor to hero in my mind. He was kind of a geek like us who was put into this unusual situation and said, well, what do I do here? Right? Now, whether you agree with how he resolved that or not, and there are arguments about that, he was somebody who said, I see something that's wrong here. I see people exerting power and influence into individual lives that don't have that right, and we should all know about that. And it certainly changed how we look at our government and technology. So you can say Orwellian, or you can just say that this is the normal course of things, right? Unions try and get more powerful and become more controlling and then lose some of their angle, some of their value. Organizations organizations that start out trying to help people sometimes start serving their own best interests. Those are kind of human motivations that you can attribute to organizations. And so I think what happens is that we are constantly in this battle between people fighting for individual liberty and individual rights and privacy and stuff like that, and all of those other organizations or governments or institutions that are trying to increase their power, their control, their authority. That natural back and forth is where all of this lies. It wasn't an attempt to be political. It was an attempt to be extrapolative as to what I see and where it's going. And in the places where I get that right, it's because, institutions are greedy control monsters. Right?
I will agree completely. And I love the fact that you've still got more coming for us. There's a second and there's a third book. I was going to say that, you can really say it without spoilers that there is certainly room to continue to play in this world once you've read the book. And I don't really think that ruins anything. And anybody out there that hasn't read it, go check it out. You're really going to love it. I personally am looking forward to the second part. And once part 2 comes out, we're going to have you on a future summit so that way we can talk about some of the juicy details of 2 and then part 3. So sci-fi obviously is not your only love, as you mentioned a few times that you work with Neil deGrasse Tyson on Startalk, and you were really a major part of that team. So as working with a prominent science communicator, being one yourself, and it's kind of led you to be an advocate for women in STEM, which is this amazing movement to basically say we're all equal. Science is science, and that's what it should be. It shouldn't matter who you are, what your skin color is, what sexuality you are, what gender you are. None of that should matter. And women in particular are kind of coming up, and we've talked about that a little bit earlier. But there is still kind of that disconnect, and it's something we're still working towards. So how did those passions kind of move you towards being somebody that advocates for women? It's kind of an obvious thing, of course you would, but it's become something you become really, really passionate about.
Bill Nye is fond of saying that, if we don't fully empower women, we're wasting 50% of humanity's brain power, and think about all the things they might solve. I just want to correct one thing. I am an enabler of science communicators, okay, or I'm an evangelist for science communicators, or I'm a fan, okay? I do not want to have who I am be put on the same level as a Summer Asher and Emily Rice or Natalia or Carolyn or Bill or David Grinspoon or, Neil, right? I'm support staff, okay? I'm happy to be there. I'm a fan who got lucky, right? But in terms of what's going on now, it's a major issue. Has it become more acute because I have a daughter, and I'm married to a very intelligent woman? I don't think so. I think that it's always been there for me in that writers in general, okay, want to be judged on their writing, not their lives. Same with actors, right? Think about somebody like a Mel Gibson, who you might love his roles, and then he says some anti-Semitic things, and I'm, Jewish. I'm an atheist, but I'm Jewish. It changed my perception of his movies. I wish he'd never done that, because then I could enjoy movies. I wish Woody Allen hadn't done what he did, because I used to like Woody Allen movies, but I've never gone to them since. Okay, and other people put that up, but I've let that intrude. So that idea, once you accept that you want to be judged on what you do, not who you are. Obviously, in your life, your friends will judge you on who you are. Your family will judge you on who you are, the people you interact with. But as a creator, you want to be judged on what you're capable of creating. I think that that's the same thing with science or any other area, that it's about the brain. It's not about the housing of the brain, okay? It shouldn't matter. Now, your life experiences give you different perspectives, and those should be celebrated. But what we should be looking at is the output, okay? Not the packaging. And there's something going on right now in that they're talking about doing an all-female version of Lord of the Flies.
Yes.
They're talking about doing a movie, and it's a couple of guys who are setting it up, right? But I have heard from women in my life, and actually there's a great article, I think it was on Vanity Fair or something that I posted, I shared recently, where they look at if girls had crash landed on that island, they wouldn't act the way the boys did. And they took the characters and they made them women and they showed the responses, right? It's a different framework, a different point of view. If you're trying to...
It's no longer Lord of the Flies. It's just not.
Right, exactly.
It's just not, yeah.
Okay. And so what happens is that I think when you look at the idea, like Bill said, that we're wasting all of this other potential, and you listen to these science educators, I get different things out of, again, Carolyn talking than I do out of Neil, right? Just like I get different things out of Neil and David Grinspoon, right? It's not about the gender of the person, but they're informed by their experiences. So David Grinspoon approaches his astrobiology different than a different astrobiologist would, right? Neil approaches his differently. And so why would we want to not hear from 50% of the perspectives in the world, especially when, at least in my life, and I think in most people's lives, if they're open, they have gotten good input, okay, equally good input from the women in their lives as the men in their lives, or from the differently gendered people in their lives, or the transgendered people in their lives, or whatever. Those different perspectives and those different approaches make a richer tapestry, and we need all the help we can get, right? When we
everybody needs to be in it. Agreed.
A bunch of old white guys sitting in a back room deciding things for women's reproductive rights and not having women in the room, we get a different approach than we would have if we had, Claire McCaskill and Kirsten Gillibrand and if they'd been in the room, right? And so I think that what we're seeing is that we're seeing that what has traditionally been a white male power structure through much of humanity. And yes, people can find little points and they can say, well, what about Catherine the Great? What about this? Queen Elizabeth. Yes, there have been moments when there have been women in positions of authority, but I'll bet if you asked any of them if they were being treated the same way that their male equivalents were, the answer would have been hell no, right? And so, if we are living an evidence-based life, if we are attempting to make the world a better place, and we are not championing everybody's right to be part of that conversation, okay, then we're doing a disservice. It's wonderful to work in an organization that sees that, but I have to say, the fact that we have more than half of our hosts of Startalk All-Stars being women is coincidental to their gender. When we invite...
That was actually going to be my next question. Right. Yeah, did you guys, did you mean to do it, or did it just kind of happen naturally? Okay.
No. And Neil, we've had that thing where Neil doesn't like to be pigeonholed into things about race, right? Because he's a scientist, right? It's the same thing with the women who are there. If they're on our show because their brains got them on their show. Their successes and their actions got them on the show. Okay, the guests are there because they're experts in those areas. They're not there because, we need a woman. That has never happened. I've never heard that said, and I would be shocked if anybody ever made that choice. Now, if we're saying, look, we can be appealing to different demographics because of this, that's true, right? That's the if I can see it, I can be it mentality, right? So there's value in elevating them, but that's not the reason we do it, okay? We would never have a person as a host or a guest because they fit a demographic slot as opposed to because they'd earned their right to have an opinion on the subject.
They've worked themselves just like everybody else has, and possibly in a great deal of ways harder. They've had to deal with a lot of the different things that we will never understand, and it's a great deal of the women that I've been able to work with or work closely with, I should say, because they're far better educated and have a doctor in front of their name. But it's always been a pleasure to work with them and to see they have that extra grit that so many don't. Like even in the science fields, it's a lot of hard work. And look at Hidden Figures. Hidden Figures was a very popular film for that exact reason of this is the way that the world used to look at somebody because of a skin color or because of a gender. And there was the smartest person in the room. And I love that we're getting past that to where I can't wait to hear an episode of Startalk All-Stars. I don't care who it is. It's all of them. And to be able to talk to Jen 11 and pick her brain at one of the Startalk events and then go right to David Grinspoon and then bounce to Emily Rice and then go over to David Grinspoon. Be able to bounce back and forth between all these people and ask them questions and watch them bounce off of each other and just see that it's that passion for science. That's what connects all of us. And Bill is famous for talking about the fact that we all came from the same place. We all came from Africa. That's where we all came from. You go back far on a far enough timeline, well, I'm trying to think of the one phrase that I heard that I loved. What do men do with, what do you have? I want to forget it now. I forgot what it was, but it was really good about the scarcity of men if there weren't women. Yeah, what would men do without women? We wouldn't do a whole lot. We would be very scarce. It's something like that because there's no us without them. And I just love that that idea that we're finally connecting with each other. And Star Talk has really always been big about reaching out into different realms. You guys are playing with science now, and you're reaching out to for so long. And so, well, only jocks like, sports, blah, blah, blah. No, there's so much science to it. And you're seeing that show evolve. All Stars is becoming bigger. You guys have so much happening. So really all access too. Then now you guys have the new Facebook channel. There's so much that's happening. What's going on with you guys right now? Maybe some of the stuff that nobody's heard. And can you give us a tease of maybe what's coming in the near future?
Well, sure. So one thing is that we know that we have a new All-Stars host, Heather Berlin.
Mm-hmm.
I just found out that this morning. So this is breaking news. Heather Berlin has been a guest in one of our most popular Startalk live events, and the videos and podcasts that came off of it, Big Brains at BAM. She's a neuroscientist. She's been on the show numerous times. She was actually a guest last night in one of the Startalk TV recording sessions.
Oh, cool.
And she's going to be our newest All-Stars host, which is great. She's she explains neuroscience brilliantly and really knows her stuff, and that's incredible. So that's one of the things that we can kind of tease out. You'll be seeing her soon. There are things I'm literally not allowed to talk about.
Of course.
Potential for another spinoff that we're looking at that looks at the science in an entirely different area than we've currently looked at. The thing that's cool about playing with science is that there are a lot of people who are sports fans who are also numbers geeks, statistics, people, or love the science of it, right? And just listen to Charles Liu, okay, who's an astrophysicist. Listen to him talk about baseball, man, or John Eric Goff. These are physicists or astrophysicists who are really into it. Neil, the same thing, right? And they have a passion because they see physics being played out in these live experiments that are sporting events, right? And so from our point of view, it's like, if you go back to the mission of kind of increasing science literacy everywhere and not being this kind of boring science show, but showing how science is part of people's lives, including celebrities, right? So celebrity audiences come to watch Neil interview, somebody, and then they find out where science, where science had fit into their lives. That says to everybody, hey, look, your relationship to science can be a little bit or a lot, but the more you know about it, the more you'll understand the world around you. It seemed to us sports was a great area for that. And so we have some people who are fans who are like, stop showing us the sports stuff, because they're thinking of it as sports. But in every episode, you're going to find out physics, and you're going to find out science that you might not have known to look for. And it will help you understand that. And so if you discount it as, oh, it's just about sports, you're missing the whole point. It's about the science in sports, not even the science of sports, the science in sports. Okay? So how is big data changing football, right? That's the intersection of technology and information with something that was traditionally, throw it to the fast guy, right? And I'm not dismissing sports that way, right? But that's the thing. When you start recognizing that you have 0.4 of a second between when the ball leaves the pitcher's hand until you swing at it as a batter, and that the human reaction time isn't fast enough to do that, that puts you in a different place when you start trying to understand why the best hitters only hit, 1 out of 3, right? Where would you have a situation where you only get 1 out of 3 right and you're the best that's ever been, right? But that's what happens in baseball. Well, why? What are all the things that make that happen, and how does that help us understand when you're throwing a ball with your kid? Okay, or when you're responding to, a car coming at you through an intersection, those understandings. So the more places that we can touch on science literacy and where science is part of it, the better. And so we're looking for that in other spin-off shows, possibly, and again, there's nothing definite, but it is a place that we're looking at. So that's kind of a tease that we're hopefully going to have something that exposes the science in some place you wouldn't even think to look for it.
I love it. And in a kind of a crazy coincidence, right before you and I hopped on, I was able to interview Neil, and we were kind of talking some things. And one of the really cool things that you guys have is Patreon, and it has given people the ability to find out a lot of this stuff ahead of time. And there's the kind of the smaller end of things, but one of the things that you guys do is the backstage stuff and the Saturnalia party and the connections, and it's how we met and how I met so many of the people of the team, as well as nearly all of the hosts of All Stars as well. But I don't know that a lot of people that even are involved in Patreon otherwise in other groups and other people don't realize what goes into what you guys do. You, Laura, Stacy, all of you guys work tirelessly to kind of make this a community. It's created real friendships. When I go to New York, I call people that I met from Startalk. Renee Douglas flew out here to Colorado Springs, and we went running around out here, and I would have never known if it wasn't for that. This kind of has become, I don't know if you guys were expecting it to be like this, but it's kind of become its own little family, and it's really kind of amazing to see. Can you kind of tell us a bit about, how this kind of came together, how you created such an amazing team, and what eventually has become, I personally think so much more than just a meet and greet after Startalk Live?
Sure. So the initial credit for even looking in the direction of Patreon actually belongs to Fraser Kane, who is Universe Today.
Fraser's awesome.
Was very helpful to me when I got started with Startalk, and helped us build our social media channels with advice and everything else, just incalculable value for us. And he pointed out that people were starting to go to Patreon to look for this crowdfunding aspect of what was going on that was very different than Kickstarter, okay, or Indiegogo or GoFundMe, because this was designed for the comic book writers, podcasters, people who had an ongoing need as opposed to a project-based need. When we started describing it to Neil, and he asked us what it was and everything, and we're describing it, Neil said, "Oh, it's a fan love machine." And that helped crystallize
the love machine.
Well, fan love machine, right? Now, look, I actually, twice a year, I have a friend who teaches marketing up at SUNY New Paltz, David Bash, Professor David Bash. And he lets me come and do the internet marketing section each semester that he does for his classes. And we talk a lot about how I got into social media, right? And where social media came from. And I think the thing that we need to look at is fan clubs. Back in the 50s, right, and the 60s, there was a Beatles fan club. Okay, when I was in high school, there were Springsteen fan clubs. The Grateful Dead had them, and people met each other through these fan clubs that were a common interest, right? They weren't necessarily official from the band, okay, but the band interacted with them because they knew that there was value in that, right? Well, social media is this giant fan club. Okay, we all get to go to various places and we meet people and all of that. So I'm seeing that with social media, and then Startalk comes along, and one of the things when Laura first hired me is I said, look, one of the places that we're going to look for growing our staff is from our fan base. So I met Stacy Severin at, I think, my first Startalk Live at the Beacon at the Bell House, and I had a tiny camera, and there she was in the front row taking pictures with this big camera, and I said, hey, get some pictures taken. Could we use yours, and would you like to take a backstage shot for us? And she said, I'd love to. In fact, Startalk's actually used a couple of my shots in the past, and I've met Neil or whatever. And so that's how we got Stacy. Now, Laura Berlin has been great at surfacing people. Ben, who's our video producer and has been doing stuff with us for a long time now, came through her. Sarah, who does Instagram, came through her.
I love Sarah.
But they were all fans. And that idea of who loves our show better than our fans, where's a better place for us to look for additional support, that's where they've come from. even our interns are frequently people, I get some from SUNY New Paltz, but a lot of them are people who are fans of the show and want to figure out how they can play along. And they reach out to us and say, hey, can I be an intern? Okay. And so some of them have even become hired eventually. Okay. Not because they were interns, but because their internship showed us what they could do and how big a fan they were. Right. And so our staff is really filled with people who were Startalk fans. So now you look at Patreon. You're putting those fans together in the same place in a kind of special space where they get to interact with us. Well, why wouldn't you all become friends, right? You have a shared passion, you have shared experiences, and, you know, we don't have 1 billion fans on Patreon, right? And so it's a kind of select group that knows the access and knows how cool it is, and it's a little bit inside, right? You guys have inside access. We'd like there to be more people with that inside access, you know, and support, of course. But the fact that we have tried very carefully to make sure that everything we did delivered the kind of value that you guys would consider valuable, okay, has been how we've, you know, approached Patreon. And we're actually about to revamp a lot of our rewards and stuff to kind of give a bunch more affordable, lower level rewards to some people.
That's really cool.
And try and broaden some of that experience for people. Obviously, you know, we can't have everybody coming backstage after a show. And in fact, the number of people who are coming backstage after shows is starting to almost hit a threshold where the show producers are like, how are we going to fit all these people in? And that's, but anybody who's ever been back there, and Neil has done it, you know, a lot, the opportunities to engage with the fans who are really super fans, who are putting themselves out and saying, no, you're so important to me. I'm willing to take some of my hard-earned paycheck, okay, some of my money to help support you and keep you guys going. And remember, we started with a grant, okay, an NSF grant. We're now fully self-funded, okay, through advertising promotions and things like Patreon. But the reality of shows versus, you know, what people perceive is not, like, we're not a big money-making kind of organization yet, right? We're still staffed and all of that. And our Patreon patrons help keep us going. You know, without them, we might not have been able to keep some of the shows afloat that we're going. You know, we're really trying to give Startalk All-Stars the best possible home. You know, one of our big negatives in our experience right now is that we separated our shows from our feed, right? And so Startalk All-Stars lives on its own feeds. And it doesn't get the kind of interaction, engagement, and listenership that it did when it was part of the Startalk feed. Playing with Science, we're still sharing into our regular feed, even though it has its own channels. And what we're seeing is a lot more engagement and a lot more satisfaction in that main feed, right? So we know we have these audiences, but they're not always, you know, following us in all the right places. Patreon is a place where we can help address some of that and, you know, talk to you guys about it. But even so, you know, we don't have anywhere near the Twitter following that Neil does, nor should we, right? We're not asking for that, right? But yeah, we could use more subscribers on our All Stars channel and on our Playing with Science channel. We could certainly use more Twitter followers, more Facebook followers, all those things, because more followers and more engagement means that more people then get served our stuff through the algorithms, right? The infamous algorithms of social media. How do we get more people to see it? The thing that burns me the most is when somebody says, I didn't know Neil had a podcast on Twitter. I just found out about you guys. Yeah. We don't have a budget for advertising. Everything we do through social media and our social media team members and our fans, right? And so we're like, what could we be doing more short of, you know, spending money, which we don't have to spend, to get the word out there. Patreon is a place that helps us do that a little bit, because our super fans are some of our best evangelists, right? You, as a great example, okay? I love it. People who are out there saying, look, I get value out of this. I'm part of the fan club. You should be too, okay? And here are some of the benefits you get when we do that. You know, and look, every once in a while we have people who are like, I'm not getting what I was hoping to get out of that. And we're like, hey, we are what we are. We don't want you to support us if you're not satisfied with what you're getting. So thank you for the existing support, and please keep listening to the shows, you know, and that's what we hope.
And I think, I mean, really when when I heard about it, I really assumed so many more people were going to be there, especially say the All-Star show. There was more hosts of the All-Star show and the people that have been guests on the show before than there was of those of us backstage. And there are people that will pay hundreds of dollars for an autograph from Neil. And yet here's an option where they can go hang out with him after a show, go see Startalk Live, pay $75, dollars for that. And then if you have hit a certain amount, you can go backstage and hang out with everybody and talk to them, or Chris Hadfield or David Grinspoon or, Bill Nye or any number of those. The first one I went to was Bill Nye's show in Austin, and Startalk Live show in Austin. And it was an incredible experience, and it just continues to be. And I love the fact that there is so much going on, and you guys are just continuing to come up with new things, and you're just funneling the money right back into it to make new shows and to bring up new ideas and to continue to make this huge place where so many of us can dive in and and be even a part of it. You mentioned hiring from people. Patreon the other day, what was it, a week and a half ago? You help wanted. Who can do editing? I love that, just to see a job offer somewhere like that, where we're talking about behind the scenes stuff and upcoming Startalk Live backstages, and hey, you want to join the team? That's amazing. It's just an incredible opportunity for so many people.
I just want to throw one thing that you said. Some people think, well, our hosts, like, they're put upon to do this. But remember that everybody who's a Startalk host is a scientist, science communicator, science educator. And so their entire lives are wrapped up in reaching out to people and getting them to fall in love with science the way they have. So any opportunity, especially one where you've just had this big audience, right? But there's a distance between you and the audience there. But then you're in a room, right? And you get to engage with people. And I think that there's some payback for them, right? That when they get to meet people like that who are adoring, and this is something that anybody who's been to a Startalk Live the first time, they have the same experience. When you hear an entire auditorium, whether it's 500 people or 2,000 people, cheering for science, and you're there because you love science,
pretty awesome.
You don't feel like the geek in the corner anymore, because the entire room is filled with geeks in the corner. And guess what? Some of those geeks are CEOs, and some of those geeks are movie stars or rock stars. I mean, we have fans across the board, right, who love the show because they love science. And that's the thing that happens with that Patreon experience, right, is that you get that kind of personal experience. I watched how Cory Booker was in a couple of backstages, right, with our fans, right? He loved the opportunity. He's a politician. But he loved the opportunity to be a politician who got to talk about science with people who cared about science, as opposed to trying to talk about science people who don't care, right? And so that opportunity, I think, is really a special one. It's probably my favorite part. That, and the fact that we get our cosmic queries through our fans and Patreon. This is something that, in social media, before I ever got here, we talked about consumer-generated content, right? We ask our fans to ask us the questions they want to ask our hosts, and then we use those to build shows out of, right? And we've done a lot of Cosmic Query shows, and we use it as the structure to answer, because if one person has that question, the chances are that many people have that question. In fact, when we solicit Cosmic Queries, the last time we did it, we had 46 pages of responses of Cosmic Queries.
Wow.
That our producers then have to go and our co-hosts go, and how do you pull out of that, right? Ones that are the best questions we haven't answered before, right? But that's how engaged our audience is, that all we have to do is say, hey, what do you want to hear about? And they ask, and then we answer, right? Now, admittedly, sometimes we get a little off track in some of those answers, okay? And we end up with questions about black holes, and suddenly we're talking about wormholes and time travel, okay? But all of our hosts also have these wide-ranging, inquisitive minds. That's why they're doing what they do. And so at any given point, okay, who knows what's going to take their fancy, right? Neil is guilty of this as everybody, right?
Absolutely.
But think about this, right? If it wasn't for questions that people are asking, we wouldn't get Neil answering things like coming up with a new superpower for Superman, which, if you've seen the video or heard about it, was, Neil and Chuck talking, and it's, a flamethrower ability, let's just say. that came out of a total joke, right? But where they go with that, right? Okay, for people who don't know, Chuck and Neil came up with the idea that Superman could light his farts. Not normally where I go, okay?
Of course he could.
But the people that have heard that have gone nuts over it, and that's serendipity, right? That's because our hosts are they're not hidebound, they're not restricted, right? And every scientist I've had the pleasure to either meet or interact with, or just write up the shows they were on and listening to the shows and help evangelize those, because I don't meet every scientist and I don't know them, and I'm a functionary, right? I don't intrude on their lives that way. So there are people who are much more aggressive at meeting people than I might be, because I just want them to do I want them to have the best shows they can have, and I don't want to get in the way of that, right? But at the same point, every time I've interacted with any of them, I remember when we were doing a virtual reality thing with Jana Levin and Neil, and we ended up having to go from the World Trade Center, the current World Trade Center, obviously, that PATH train station and everything, to where we were going to film, looking up under the East River bridges. Jana and I and I forget who else was with us. We ended up getting lost. We're wandering around. So I got to have all this time talking to Jana Levin, right? This is a woman who has her fingers on the very, key questions of existence itself. She has a mind, and she knows this stuff, right? And so I actually had the opportunity to talk to somebody. You want to ask where we come from, where we're going, all that stuff. This is one of the women who, more than almost anybody else on the planet, knows those answers.
And is happy to talk about it as long as you want to. As long as you want to.
Just that ability, and our fans have that too. And somebody will ask a question on Twitter, and we don't have the answer because we're not scientists. So I'll ask Jana, or I'll ask David Grinspoon to jump in, right? Or we have an intern who's an astronomer student, and he works in an observatory, Kirk. And I'll ask Kirk sometimes, but I'll also ask David Grinspoon or Jana or whatever, Emily Rice, to answer these questions, and they do. Access that social media provides, that conduit that Startalk social media represents to these brains who are willing and happy and eager to teach and share. That's this amazing thing.
Want to. Yeah, right. They can't wait. Jeff, I love seeing the side of you. Normally, whenever we catch up, you're trying to basically herd cats. There's so many things going on around you, and it's really cool to see you just nerd out like we do. And I know that you're always paying attention and always watching stuff, but it's really cool to see this side. And just to kind of wrap it up a little bit of just some advice for people that maybe kind of want to do what you're doing, upcoming writers, science communicators, really anybody with that dream that wants to kind of follow in your footsteps. What's some advice that you have for those people looking to, change the world?
Sure. I think the single biggest thing I can say is simply just ask. Just do it. Right? Think about Neil's story about Carl Sagan. Right? Neil writes to Carl Sagan and says, "Hey, I'm interested in your school. Can I come?" And Sagan says, "Sure." And Sagan is even like, "Hey, it's snowing. You could stay at my place if you wanted." Right? That he just asked. It's the same thing. The world is filled with people who are waiting for their opportunities. But the people that we all love are people who didn't wait. They made their opportunities. Look at Carolyn Porco. Okay? In Carolyn Porco's life story, at one point, she's out chopping wood in the woods, right? And then she's working with Carl Sagan. Why? Because she wanted an answer to what is life and what is out there, and she decided to go get it on her own. Every person that is a Startalk All-Stars host, every person that is working for Startalk right now, are people who basically said, I want to do it. Is there room for me? Right? Or they made their own. Neil talks about, when people ask him about his role model, what does Neil say? I don't have a role model. Okay, the universe called me, right? That idea, if you love this and this is what you want to do, just find the places to do it, okay? Get involved, depending on where you are in your career. Start writing for a school newspaper if you're that young. Okay, look for an internship somewhere. The Planetary Society, there are all these places, JPL, all these places that need interns. Have you ever seen the videos that the JPL interns do? Okay, every year they do that. They're wonderful. How did those people get there? they didn't get plucked out of the ether by JPL. They approached JPL and said, I want to be an intern, right? Look at the young Mars astronauts right now, okay? People like Astronomy that are starting to look at the world and say, I want to go to Mars. What's it going to take for me to get there? I'm going to get involved. I'm going to get my name out there. Right, exactly. You're a fan who said, I'm just going to go start doing this. This space summit exists because you said, and your partner said, let's do a space summit. Without you saying that, it doesn't exist, right? So the how is do it yourself and find people who will let you do it for them and with them, okay? And be persistent. We have had people that start. Look at Stacy. Okay, Stacy was at every Startalk show because she loved being there. So you know, she was there at that moment that opportunity struck and said, hey, do you want to going back to Marvel, I was working at a Marvel convention, and I believe it was the Detroit convention, and this guy walks up to me and he says, hey, I want to write for Marvel. What can I do? And I said, after the convention, send me your stuff and you can come, you know, talk to us, whatever. And that, again, was Jim Kruger. I've mentioned him a few times, right? But he ended up coming to work for me at Marvel and then becoming a Marvel writer. And now Jim Kruger is a top comic book creator who's created Foot Soldiers and Earth X and all this other great stuff because he put himself out there. So it's really just raise your hand, ask the question, take a little bit of initiative. Okay. Somebody asked me, how do you become a Startalk intern? The answer is ask. You know, you have to have some qualifications, you know, but everybody who became a Startalk intern literally became it because they said to me, hey, you want an intern? The people who didn't become Startalk interns didn't become it because they didn't bother to ask. Now, you know, there's a top limit. Now that I'm talking to you here about this, we'll get 1 million people who want to be interns and we won't be able to take them all. But it's really just put yourself out.
Well, I get to hear first, so I'm asking first. No.
It's the biggest thing that I can say about anything in life, right, is don't wait around for life to pick you. Just make it happen, right? And make it happen small, make it happen in smart ways so that eventually the people who own the mechanisms of production go, I need somebody, and you're the path of least resistance, right? You're there. We know you. We want you. You've been in our face for a long time. How'd you like to come on board?
I love it. That was great, Jeff. Thank you so much for all your insights and just talking to us about so many things that mean so much to you today. It was really an amazing interview. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity. Look, anything I can do, I've been really lousy at trying to get Spirit in real time out there. I'm good at everybody else's marketing but my own. So anything that helps put Spirit on the map, I feel like I've created these amazing characters and I've let them down on the business side, not the writing side, but the business side. And so this was a great opportunity for me. But also, anytime I get to evangelize Startalk, you know, it's the little way that I can help all of those real science educators and real science communicators get their word out to bigger audiences. So thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And for everybody watching at home, thank you so much for watching today. And we've got more interviews coming your way. Stick with the summit, and we'll have more coming to you very soon. Thanks, everybody.